I'm Marin, 29. And 2 years ago, I was sure I'd finally found the kind of love I didn't believe existed for people like me, until I realized I was being asked to pay for it. Literally. I grew up in a tiny town outside Springfield, Missouri. My dad taught geometry at the local high school for almost 30 years. My mom worked nights at a diner and sewed curtains on weekends to cover the gaps. We didn't have much, but we had decency, work ethic, and an almost annoying level of optimism that things get better if you just keep showing up. I showed up everywhere I could. I applied to every scholarship I could find, learned to code using secondhand library books, and eventually earned a degree in computational health systems. I graduated at the top of my class from a school nobody on the coast has ever heard of. Still, I built something real. At 25, I co-founded a startup that designs AI tools for rural hospitals. Places like the one that misdiagnosed my mom's lupus because they still used paper records. My company survived 2 deadbeat investors, 1 fire in our first office, and a global pandemic. But it was starting to work. We had 6 employees, a few pilot programs running, and actual funding on the way. For the first time, I could afford an apartment that didn't have mice. That's when I met Graham. He was attending a healthcare policy summit in Denver, and we were seated next to each other at some overpriced networking lunch. He had the kind of voice that made you stop what you were doing to listen. Warm, thoughtful, like he genuinely cared. I liked that he asked me questions, not just what I did, but why I did it. And unlike 90% of the guys I'd dated before, he didn't get weird when I talked about running a company. He called me CEO like it was a compliment. I fell for him slowly, the way frost creeps up a window. Quiet until suddenly it's everywhere. He told me his family ran a philanthropic real estate group, mostly building clinics and affordable housing. He was based in Boulder, came from money, but never acted like it. No flexing, no condescension. When I mentioned I still drove the Corolla I'd had since college, he said, "If it runs, it rules." For 2 years, he supported every hard day I had. He brought me lunch when I forgot to eat, celebrated every grant we landed, and once even stayed up all night testing software bugs with my team just so I wouldn't fall asleep at my desk. I thought, this is what a real partnership looks like. So when he proposed last fall, with his grandmother's sapphire ring under a sky full of Colorado stars, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Then he said something that should have made me pause. "We'll tell Mom together," he said. "She's particular, but once she sees who you are, she'll love you." He never talked much about her before. I assumed maybe they weren't close. He'd mentioned her in passing. Clara Winslow, ran the foundation arm of the family company, hosted galas, sat on hospital boards. I looked her up once and found an article calling her the Iron Swan of Aspen. I laughed at the time. A month after we got engaged, Graham invited me to his family's weekend estate in Aspen. "Just dinner," he said. "Nothing formal." I flew in from St. Louis straight from a site visit, still buzzing with the excitement of a new hospital signing on for our pilot program. He picked me up in his Jeep and acted normal. But as we climbed the snow-covered mountain road, I started to feel off. Like I was stepping into a room where everyone already knew the rules, and I hadn't gotten the memo. Their house wasn't a house. It was a damn fortress in white marble with staff in uniform and a chandelier made of hand-blown glass shaped like deer antlers. Clara greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes and said, "So this is the girl from the data place." I said, "Hi, I'm Marin. I run a health tech company for underserved communities." She blinked, then said, "Oh, you work." I laughed, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. At dinner, every topic was a trap. She asked about my family. When I said my dad taught high school, she raised an eyebrow and sipped her wine. When I shared a success story about our software alerting a small clinic to a drug interaction, she waved it off. "How quaint," she said. "But Graham needs someone who's ready to prioritize family, not code." I should have walked out then. But I didn't, because I hadn't seen the envelope yet. And because I hadn't realized that Graham, the man who once called me CEO with pride, had been raised to believe love comes with a price tag. That price was waiting in Clara's study, tucked in a thin white envelope on her polished oak desk. And what it said nearly destroyed everything I thought I knew about love. The envelope was thin, cream-colored, embossed with a faint gold W. It sat perfectly centered on the edge of Clara Winslow's massive mahogany desk, like it had been placed there for dramatic effect. Maybe it had. Nothing in that house seemed accidental. Graham didn't say anything when she handed it to me. He just looked out the window as if the snow falling outside deserved his full attention. Inside the envelope was a typed letter. 2 pages, double-spaced, signed in fountain pen. It congratulated me on my engagement and welcomed me into the Winslow family legacy. Then, in polite, practiced language, it outlined what Clara called a customary commitment contribution. $175,000 to be paid to a family trust before the wedding. The letter explained that all Winslow spouses are asked to participate as a symbol of shared investment in the family future. I stood there, holding the paper like it might burn through my hands. "This is a joke, right?" I said, laughing weakly. Clara smiled, but it was all teeth. "It's a tradition. You're not the first. We find that this step helps clarify intentions." "I thought my intentions were pretty clear," I said. "I'm marrying Graham because I love him." "Well," she said, still smiling, "that's a lovely sentiment. But in our world, love has never been the only foundation for a strong marriage." I looked at Graham. He didn't meet my eyes. Just said quietly, "It's just something she does. My brother's wife did it. My cousin, too." "And you're okay with that?" I asked. "You're okay with your fiancé being asked to, what? Prove she's worthy with a wire transfer?" He finally looked at me. And what I saw wasn't cruelty. It was cowardice. "It's not personal," he said. "It's just the way things work in my family." That was the moment something broke. Not loudly, not violently, but quietly. Like a thread pulled from the center of a tightly stitched seam. You don't notice it at first, but the whole fabric starts to loosen. I stayed the rest of the weekend, mostly because I didn't want to give Clara the satisfaction of watching me leave angry. I smiled. I thanked her for the wine. I even complimented the handmade curtains in the guest suite. Though later I found out she hadn't sewn them, just imported them from Milan. I didn't speak to Graham that night. He tried to come into the guest room around midnight, but I locked the door. I couldn't look at him. I didn't trust what might come out of my mouth if I did. The following week was a blur. I flew back to Missouri and buried myself in work. Our beta testing for a diagnostic module was going live at a rural hospital near Joplin. I barely ate, barely slept. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe this was some bizarre elite ritual I just didn't understand. But something kept nagging at me. The way Clara had handed me the envelope like it was perfectly normal. The way Graham hadn't defended me. The way the letter had been typed in advance. This wasn't a test. It was a setup. 3 days later, Graham called. I didn't pick up. He texted instead, "Mom wants to know if you have questions about the contribution." She's happy to clarify. I didn't respond. An hour later, Clara emailed me directly. Not about the dowry, about work. You see, the Winslow Foundation, through one of their subsidiaries, was a major donor to the hospital running our pilot AI program. Clara, apparently, sat on the advisory board. She requested a brief consultation with our team about adjusting some elements of the rollout. Nothing urgent, she wrote. Just optimizations. But when we got on the Zoom call, it became clear. She didn't want suggestions. She wanted control. She asked if we could build a second version of the software to include predictive modeling for patient outcomes, a feature that would take months of R&D and wasn't part of our agreement. When I reminded her of that, she smiled. Same cold smile as always, and said, "Well, I assumed you'd be more accommodating, given your connection to our family now." I said nothing. Just ended the call as politely as I could and sat there for 20 minutes, staring at my screen like it had personally betrayed me. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the $175,000. That was just the opening bid. Clara Winslow didn't want a daughter-in-law. She wanted an asset. And Graham? He was fine with that, as long as he stayed comfortable. The people I loved, my team, my co-founder, our hospital partners, were suddenly at risk because I'd fallen for someone who'd rather appease his mother than protect the woman he claimed to love. So I did what I do best. I made a plan. I didn't answer Graham's next few calls. I couldn't. Every time his name lit up my phone, my stomach twisted. Not because I missed him, because I didn't recognize him anymore. It's a strange thing, realizing someone you love isn't who you thought they were. Or maybe they were, and you just didn't want to see it. I kept thinking back to the way he looked away while Clara handed me that envelope, like a man watching someone else take a punch he knew was coming. That weekend, I met with my co-founder, Jared. He's the kind of guy who wears the same 3 hoodies on rotation and once accidentally walked into a board meeting holding a breakfast burrito. But when it comes to business, he's the sharpest mind I know. I told him everything. The dowry letter, the hospital pressure, Clara's backdoor maneuvering. He didn't even blink. "She's trying to own you," he said. "Not just you. Us." I nodded. "And Graham's just letting her." We both stared at my laptop for a long time. The screen was open to an internal email thread between our team and the hospital administrator. The administrator had suddenly started demanding detailed access to our backend, something no client had ever asked for, and something we explicitly denied in our contract. "It's Clara," I said quietly. "She's pushing them from inside." Jared leaned back and said what I'd been trying not to admit out loud. "We need to consider cutting the partnership. 20% of our early funding had been tied to that pilot program. Losing it could mean layoffs, delays, scrap development. But the thought of letting Clara Winslow creep any deeper into what I'd built made me feel physically sick. I needed time to think. I needed distance. And most of all, I needed to stop waiting for someone else to make things right. So I did what I hadn't done in years. I drove back home to Missouri. My dad was sitting on the porch when I pulled up. He hadn't changed, still wore the same zip-up hoodie and scuffed boots he'd worn when I was in middle school. When I told him what was happening, he listened without interrupting. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You can't make people respect you by paying their price. And if someone loves you, they'd never let you try." I cried that night. The kind of cry that doesn't look pretty. The kind you don't post about on Instagram. It was rage, grief, disappointment, all the emotions I'd tried to power through for weeks. I let it all out because somewhere deep down, I knew the next step was going to take everything I had left. When I got back to St. Louis, I called my friend Kira. She's a contracts attorney, the kind who keeps receipts like it's a religion. I asked her to help me review every single interaction we'd had with the hospital and the foundation. It took us 2 days, but what we found was enough to build a small mountain of leverage. There were multiple emails, some forwarded to me by a sympathetic hospital employee, where Clara had pressured leadership to reevaluate our contract terms. There was one message from her assistant that actually used the phrase, "If she wants to be part of the Winslow family, she should demonstrate alignment." Alignment. Like I was a brand to acquire. A check to cash. And then came the final blow. A screenshot from a text thread between Graham and Clara sent anonymously through a burner email. I still don't know who sent it, and maybe I never will. But I'm grateful they did. Clara. She's being stubborn. Leverage the hospital angle. She'll break if she realizes she's risking her own company. Graham. I've tried. She's emotional about it. Still believes it's about love. Clara. Then remind her what's at stake. She's smart enough to understand what happens if she loses our support. Graham. I'll handle it. Handle me. Like a problem. Like a merger gone sideways. That's when something inside me snapped. Not from weakness, but from clarity. I hadn't just been betrayed. I'd been handled, categorized, cost analyzed. And now, finally, I could see the truth without flinching. Graham never planned to protect me. He planned to manage me, just like his mother had taught him. So I made a different plan. I didn't cry when I read the text messages. I didn't scream, throw my phone, or rage text Graham. I just sat there in my apartment, the one with the busted heater and the view of a parking lot, reading those words over and over again until they stopped surprising me. She's emotional about it. Still believes it's about love. Remind her what's at stake. They weren't trying to win me back. They were trying to break me in half. But that night, instead of spiraling, I opened my laptop and started building a folder. I titled it plainly, Leverage. Inside, I dumped every piece of correspondence Clara had sent, every forwarded message from hospital admins, screenshots of Slack conversations with my team flagging irregular requests. I included the contract clause outlining scope limitations and Clara's optimizations that pushed way past those lines. Kira, my attorney friend, added a legal brief flagging multiple potential breaches. And at the center of it all, those texts, the quiet smoking gun. What they'd underestimated wasn't just my intelligence, it was my patience. I knew if I fought them on emotion, I'd lose. I'd look unstable, dramatic, disposable. So instead, I went quiet. I didn't answer Graham's next 3 calls. I ignored Clara's checking in email. I let them wonder if I was finally folding. Meanwhile, I made moves. Jared and I called an emergency meeting with our board. I laid it all out. No dramatics, just facts. Clara's interference, the contractual violations, the manipulations. I told them this wasn't just about one client anymore. It was about precedent. If we let this slide, who were we? To my surprise, no one pushed back. One board member even said, "You're doing the right thing. We backed you, not the Winslows." We drafted a formal disengagement letter, backed by legal documentation and a transition plan. I timed the delivery for Monday morning, 1 hour before I was set to meet Clara face to face. Yes, meet. In person. I'd requested the meeting. At my office. No assistants, no advisors, just us. She showed up exactly at 9 a.m., wearing a cream wool coat and sunglasses indoors. I greeted her in the lobby myself and walked her to our small but clean conference room. On the table was a single folder. No coffee, no pleasantries. I sat down. She stayed standing. "You asked for this meeting," she said coolly. I assumed it was to work out the contribution terms. I smiled. Small, deliberate. "Actually, I'm here to return something." I slid the folder across the table. She opened it, read the first page. Her jaw tensed. "This is a termination notice," she said. "You're breaking the contract?" "We're exiting the partnership," I corrected. Per Section 8.3, due to sustained interference and coercive behavior tied directly to non-contractual personal demands. "You're bluffing." "No, Clara. I'm finally calling yours." She flipped to the next page and froze. The text screenshots, the flagged clauses, my signature next to Kira's legal stamp. She looked up. "You realize who I am in this industry?" "I do, which is why this decision wasn't easy. But it's necessary." She scoffed. "This is petty. You're ruining your own company to prove a point." "No," I said, calm and clear. "I'm saving it. From people like you." For the first time, her mask slipped. Just a little. Her lips twitched like she wanted to say something sharper but couldn't find the right blade. "I have been generous," she hissed. "I could have made you. And that's exactly the problem." I stood up. "We're done here, Clara. This ends today." As I walked her to the door, she paused. "You'll regret this." "I already regret ever believing I needed your approval." She didn't respond, just walked out, stiff and silent. I closed the door and leaned against it, shaking, not from fear, but release. My hands trembled, but my spine had never felt straighter. Later that afternoon, Graham showed up. I didn't let him in. He stood in the hallway holding a paper bag and a sad expression. "I brought soup," he said, like it was 2019 and we were still us. "I'm not sick," I replied. "Just busy." He shifted his weight. "Mom said you're being dramatic, that you went nuclear." "Tell your mom I don't do installments, I don't do silence, and I sure as hell don't do family initiation fees." He blinked. "You really think you can take us on?" "I already did," I said, and closed the door. I didn't hear from Clara again. Not directly, anyway. What I did hear, 2 weeks later, was that the Winslow Foundation had quietly pulled out of 3 hospital partnerships, including the one we'd exited. Apparently, a few other vendors had started raising questions after a pattern of inappropriate donor interference came to light. I never leaked anything. I didn't have to. All it took was a few nervous administrators realizing they'd handed too much power to someone who viewed philanthropy like a boardroom negotiation. The same way she viewed marriage. By the end of the quarter, Winslow's name disappeared from a hospital newsletter I used to read for updates. A few months after that, I heard from a mutual connection that Clara had stepped back from public leadership to focus on family. That's rich. I didn't celebrate, though. I wasn't dancing on any ashes. I just got back to work. We tightened our budget, delayed our next product rollout by a month, and held some brutally honest team meetings. And then somehow, the tide turned. Out of nowhere, we got approached by a coalition of rural clinics in Oklahoma looking for a clean, no-politics AI platform. One of their directors had read my blog post about ethical boundaries in nonprofit tech and forwarded it to others. They said it felt human. That meant more to me than any investor pitch I'd ever written. By spring, we'd replaced the revenue lost from Winslow. By summer, we'd doubled it. As for Graham, he emailed once, 6 weeks after I ended it. Subject line: "Are you really gone?" No greeting, no apology. Just 3 sentences about how things got out of hand and maybe we could talk when emotions settled. I never replied. I didn't need to. The ring he gave me sat in a drawer for months. One day I took it to a local jeweler who specialized in antique stones. He appraised it, smiled, and said, "This one's been through something." So had I. I sold it. Used the money to fund a scholarship for first-gen women in STEM. We named it after my mom. And here's the funny thing. After all that chaos, the person I ended up connecting with most was someone I never expected. Richard Winslow, Graham's father. He reached out via LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn. Said he was ashamed of how things unfolded and wanted to apologize for his silence. I didn't trust it at first, but we met for coffee in a neutral space. A tiny bookstore cafe downtown. No fancy suits or marble floors. He looked tired. Lighter, too. Said he'd moved out of the Aspen house and was reevaluating his role in the family legacy. He didn't try to excuse Clara. In fact, he said he'd spent 20 years watching her destroy anything she couldn't control. He told me, "Watching you walk away, without screaming, without playing the game, made me realize I hadn't stood up for a damn thing in decades." That conversation stayed with me. So did the fact that I never once heard Clara's name again in any professional setting after that year. Not in meetings, not in emails, not in whispers. It was like the air had cleared. And me? I started sleeping again. I'm not going to pretend any of this was easy. It wasn't a movie ending. There were nights I second-guessed everything. Times I wanted to cave, moments I felt small. But I kept going, because deep down I knew what I was fighting for wasn't just my business. It was me. My dignity. My story. My ability to build something that couldn't be bought or broken. Looking back now, I realized something no one ever taught me. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not react. It's to listen. To wait. To learn exactly where the knife is coming from. And then take the blade away from their hands without spilling a single drop of your own blood. And maybe, just maybe, walk out smiling. If you've ever had to walk away from something or someone because staying meant losing yourself, I hope you know how strong that choice makes you. It doesn't have to be loud to be brave. If any part of this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're someone who's still in the middle of your own chapter, I see you. Stick around. There's more to come.